William James Durant, 1885-1981, was an American historian and author. With his wife Arial, 1898-1981, he co-authored the 11-volume The Story of Civilization and The Story of Philosophy. These two texts are still very popular and influential. They won the prestigious Pulitzer Prize in 1968. They were major activists and joined many campaigns, including those for equal rights for workers and the women's right to vote. They were interested in science and religion and lectured extensively on these topics all around the world. The present essay is from a collection, The Lessons of History, published in 1968. Hello everybody. My name is Pramod Nair of the Department of English, University of Hyderabad. In this session, we are going to be looking at Will and Arial Durant's famous essay, Is Progress Real? The essay raises several important questions of the nature of human happiness, human conditions, the use of technology for the acquisition of happiness, questions that have remained relevant even today, years after the essay first appeared. The essay opens with a set of fundamental assumptions on which the rest of the argument depend. The assumption is the nature of the human condition has not changed. The quest for pleasure, the quest for safety, clothing, security, competition, and war have been consistent to the human condition ever since humankind appeared on earth. What has changed is the process and the method through which human beings have pursued these same goals. What has also changed, the essay assumes, is the consequence of some of these methods. That is, in the pursuit of pleasure, mankind's inventions have also produced pain. In the pursuit of happiness, the methods and devices that humankind has employed has resulted in tribulations and suffering for a lot of people. This essay suggests that the reason for the absence of pure pleasure as a goal is to do with the fact that we have never pondered over the reasons why certain devices were invented. That is, the essay asks us to pay attention to the intention behind the invention of any device. For example, if the goal of atomic energy or nuclear power has been just safe, peaceful power for the entire Earth, it would have had a different consequence. As has been demonstrated in history, the role of nuclear power has not been entirely for the pursuit of the larger benefit of mankind. It has resulted in huge destruction, specifically during the Second World War over the Japanese cities, and that is entirely the result of an absence of intention, or rather an absence of noble and good intentions. The essay here asks us to stop a moment and think, is the development of so much technology, the development of so many scientific theories and inventions and drugs, chemicals, the pursuit of the conquest of outer space, driven entirely by the need for human happiness? The essay answers, no, it is not. The pursuit of happiness is one part of what humankind actually does with its developments. It's only one part of what mankind pursues. If the intentions behind any development are not very clear, or if they are maybe even slightly dubious, then the consequences of technology are not entirely safety and security. The consequences can be extremely dangerous. The essay, therefore, asks us to align two things: development, which includes science and technology, devices, instruments, medicines, whatever you can think of as the idea of progress. We need to align that with the intention behind any of those inventions. What causes the scientists to pursue a certain course of action in the laboratory? Why do the scientists, funded by various agencies, including governments around the world, seek to invent certain things? We need to bring back the idea of a moral basis, an ethical condition that promotes scientific developments and technologies. Now that we have got the assumptions behind the essay clear and the first key argument elaborated, let's move on to discuss what the essay says about scientific developments. Think of inventions like the wheel, like spacecraft, like the huge telecommunication structures that have come up at least since the middle of the 19th century, and this includes the invention of electricity and the transmission of electricity since roughly the end of the 19th century. The signs of progress that we see around us today are technologies that have helped humans live in slightly different ways from their ancestors. For example, the nature of human life, the condition of health, the treatment of sickness, all of these have been radically different in the 20th century as opposed to the way the ancient humans lived. Let's take just one example of penicillin, the broad-spectrum antibiotic whose invention and manufacture in laboratories has made life bearable for several suffering humans around the world across the century. Now, is this progress? The answer would be, of course, it is progress. It is progress because it is beneficial to mankind. The idea of progress, therefore, hinges upon our ability to change the quality of life from the quality of life lived by our ancestors. That is, every generation acquires pleasure, enjoys safety, lives in better conditions, wears better clothing, all because of the idea of progress having changed and the devices of progress having changed. Here I must draw your attention to the two components that we began with, that the idea of progress must always be aligned with the intention behind the definition of progress and the intention behind any invention. How do we define the better quality of life for us today? Based on that question, we need to ask, does any particular device, whether it's cable television or the internet, improve the quality of our life? Therefore, the definitional question, as we might think of it, what makes our life better, must therefore also be addressed to, does this make our life better? This kind of questioning brings back, like I said at the beginning, the question of moral and ethical reasoning behind any technological invention. This applies to any spectrum of technological developments that constitute progress today. It could be industrialization from roughly the invention of steam from the mid-19th century in Europe, through to penicillin and drugs, and now telecommunications and internet digital cultures that we see around us today. The essay assumes that the idea of progress is invariably connected to the question of science. There is this particular problem in the essay, of course, that science is taken as the domain in which progress is measured and defined and determined. This is not perhaps entirely true, but because we live in an age where science dominates our lives, maybe it is necessary to look at progress entirely through the eyes of science. The essayists argue that the idea of progress as made visible in science has not necessarily changed human nature. Now, this is a crucial point. The developments that we see around us today, from penicillin to electricity to digital cultures to radio and television and forms of transportation, have made the quality of our lives better. On that there is no dispute or argument. However, what is arguable, what is debatable, is whether they have changed human nature fundamentally. In one of those unforgettable moments in the essay, the Durant suggests that the human being in a car is not very advanced in terms of civilization or manners than the human being on 2 feet. That is, the trousered ape, as they put it, remains a barbarian, uncivilized, savage, even if he's sitting in a motor car worth a lot of money. Even if he's sitting in a vehicle which has cost a lot of money to produce, to distribute, and is supposedly an extraordinary technological invention. It might appear to us that it is a sign of progress, but what is disputable here is, has it made us better human beings? That is, the essay has now moved from the intention behind the production of any particular device to the use of any particular technological invention. Can progress be measured in terms of how we use a device? Has the use of nuclear technology made us better human beings? Here we need to pause for a moment and reflect. Does the idea of progress also imply a progress in the general manners of mankind, our general civility towards others, our levels of tolerance, understanding and love for fellow human beings? Does the acquisition of any particular technological device, the use of any particular instrument, make us better human beings? What the essay, I think, is asking us to dwell upon is, in our pursuit of pleasure, in our pursuit of comfort via scientific developments, have we forgotten something that is intrinsic to human nature? Has any of this altered the fundamental condition of human nature, the condition of the human mind, our personality, and so on and so forth? That is, does my driving a car, sitting in an aeroplane, or using a spacecraft make me more tolerant towards other human beings? Now please pay attention to this particular shift within the essay. They began with the question, why are we inventing certain things? Now we have reached a question, how are we using these certain things? The first was a question of ethics. Why do scientists and governments sponsor certain kinds of research? Here again we are back to a question of ethics. How are we using it? How are we using any particular device? Please note that the essay also has suggested to us that if we lack an ethical basis, an ethical cause for invention of any particular object or device, the chances that we misuse it for destructive purposes is very high. In other words, if we do not have a good justification for the invention of any particular device or instrument, then it is more than possible that we will use it for something awful, something that produces suffering and pain rather than pleasure and comfort. Now this is a question of ethics. As you can see, I am proposing that this essay is not really only about progress. The essay is primarily about the question of the ethics of progress. Now, up to this point we have talked about the ethics of invention and the ethics of usage. As a good instance of this misuse of technology and the very questionable nature of progress, the essay points out a couple of very fascinating details. If progress is something that applies to the entire mankind, then why do we have things like urban poverty, suffering, and crime in cities? Let's not forget, progress has invariably been associated with industrialized cities, with the metropolis. Right? Now, in this particular essay, by pointing to this, we see the essays addressing a particular paradox. If progress has changed lives, why has it not changed the lives of everyone? That is, does the idea of progress apply to all human beings on earth, or does it apply to some and not to others? Is the development of, say, digital culture or penicillin or advanced healthcare applicable to all people across the surface of the earth? We should know the answer. The answer is no. Progress, therefore, is not something that encaptures everyone. It does not encompass everyone. Progress is different for different regions of the world, for different cultures around the world, and for different people within the same city. For example, if the city is seen as a sign of progress, and this is a narrative that has applied to all cultures since at least the middle of the 19th century, that the more cities you have, the more developed the country or the culture actually is. Now take a look at cities. There is more poverty in cities than there is in any rural area of any country. There's more suffering, there's more crime, there's more insecurity and danger in cities rather than in the countryside. Using this as an example, the essays suggest progress does not mean progress for everyone. Progress acquires happiness for some, provides safety for others, but leaves a lot of people unattended too. This makes progress a rather uncertain and unstable thing. It is not possible to think of progress as universal. And that is one of the key arguments in the essay itself, that progress is not universal. The very fact that within these pockets of progress there exist pockets of crime and suffering indicate that progress has not touched everybody's lives. You will recall here that there has been a lot of criticism about the so-called progress India has made. Whenever elections come around, for example, the people in newspapers conduct opinion polls and surveys. And when they talk to the urban poor, the answer that they give is the same. How does it matter which government takes charge at the center? How does it matter who heads any government? Our lives have not changed. This is a good example of the problem of progress. We can think of it as a problem for the simple reason that progress does not work equally well for everyone. If the urban poor have remained poor for years and years after independence in India's case, then it means something very simple. They have not seen progress. We might argue that India has progressed in several domains. We might suggest that progress has happened in advanced healthcare. But the urban poor will tell you advanced healthcare is not applicable to them. That our primary health in rural India is still rather miserable. How does one then define India as progressing at all? How does one see this progress at all? Now, the essay has therefore established that progress is not equal. It does not apply to all people in any culture. It also does not apply to all societies, to various parts of the world in different geographical locations. They move on to another key point. The question they now ask is, has progress in science, has the development in science, in modernity, made us more tolerant? The argument here is, science has somehow become a substitute for religion, for faith. And interestingly, and perhaps more dangerously and worryingly, the developments in science and technologies have not really improved our sensibilities. Here the essays take a slightly changed route. They address the question of religion and the arts. The question they ask is, are we now in this day of great modernity, this great era of progress, possessed with a greater sensibility? Are we producing better architecture, better arts than our ancient ancestors? The answer is very obviously no. That is, our idea of progress has somehow not included the idea of a progress in our sensibilities, in our mindset. If we are progressing in our pursuit of happiness, in greater healthcare, then does it not also mean that we should be more progressive in our minds? Should it not make us more tolerant and understanding towards fellow human beings? But has that happened? It very obviously has not. In fact, as we know when we look at newspapers or watch television news on any day, there is more frustration, anger and intolerance than there ever was before. We arguably lead better, more comfortable and secure lives than our grandparents' generation, but it has not made us more tolerant. We are not producing better works of art. Our sensibilities are not any more refined and advanced, we can think of it as progress, than our ancestors. So then, what has science done? In our pursuit of a very technologized, instrument-driven rationality, in our pursuit of an instrument-driven happiness, we have forgotten to improve our minds, improve our sensibilities. And this, according to the essay, is a very dangerous moment. The essay now takes a very interesting trajectory. Having argued that the idea of progress connected with science and developments in technology have not improved our sensibilities, they take us back to the ancient world. Using the examples from Egypt and the ancient world's great wonders, which includes, as we know, the architectural splendors of the Parthenon, the Roman Empire and Egyptian pyramids, they ask a question. Can we claim that anything we construct now is an improvement in either aesthetics or scientific technologies or the science of architecture than the wonders of Egyptian pyramids? Are the pyramids not significantly better in composition, in aesthetic appeal, and the very marvel of architecture, way better than anything we have produced in the recent times in our so-called modern technological age? The answer is very obvious. Yes, they are way better than anything we have produced thus far. Now, this makes us aware of a huge problem with the argument of progress. If we have progressed significantly from the ancient times, why is it we are not able to replicate anything of the great aesthetic architectural sensibility of the ancient world? Why is it we are not able to build things like the pyramids? The counter to that is, of course, very obvious. We can refer to the great bridges, the chrome and glass structures, the skyscrapers of modern times. But the essay, please remember, is set somewhere in the 1960s, and it is not yet the time of this great architecture that we see now. So the essay is concerned with a comparison. The essay projects the ancient world's inventions, its architectural devices, and its great glorious buildings as the high watermark of all civilized sensibilities. And their point is, if the ancients could build such marvels, if they could develop such fantastic pieces of architecture, then are they not far more progressed than us? Do they not show greater signs of progress and development than us? And the answer would have to be yes. The art and architecture of the ancient world has never been replicated. It cannot be duplicated no matter how much effort and computer technology we may have at our command. Now please note, this is not the problem of technology. This is not an issue that they had better devices and better science than us. It is not about science at all. It is about our aesthetic judgment, our sensibilities. The point they're making is that no matter how much science, how much development technologies, how much architectural sciences we have at our disposal, because we lack the sensibility of the ancients, we will never build anything like them. Following from that, of course, is a logical next step. There is no way that our idea of progress can be measured against the progress the ancients had made. That progress is symbolized in the wonders of the ancient world. We now move on to the question of the uneven nature of progress. The Durants accept that progress has happened in different ways for different cultures. So, for example, the problem of children dying at childbirth or in early stages has more or less disappeared across the cultures from various parts of the world. India is, of course, one of them, in which this was a very serious problem right up to the 1980s. We know that from our own history. But the Durants point out that progress is always uneven. It's not the same progress for, say, Africa or, say, the United States and the Third World. The idea of progress is different because we pursue different goals. More importantly, we pursue those goals through different modes. It's not the same method of seeking happiness. You need to pause a little and look at the cultures around us. The American idea of progress for families and individuals is to do your own thing, to be individualistic, as they say. Our idea of progress for an individual is based primarily on whether we are individually happy but also happy within a community or a family. Our idea of progress, therefore, would mean our ability to fit in and be happy with not just ourselves but in a family. A kind of Asian civilizational mode of progress. If we can assume this, then it follows logically that what we define as progress is very radically different from what the West would define as progress. Our move towards individualism is not to be deemed as progress in the Asian or Indian sense of the term. it is an American sense of what progress means. But there is one significant way in which the idea of progress is common to a lot of people from around the world, and that is the idea of democracy. The Durants suggest that democracy, freedom, and the freedom from tyranny, the freedom from unhappiness, is something that is universal to practically any culture and society around the world. Our world today, in the late 20th and early 21st century, or if you want to look at the time that the Durants were writing, the 1960s, is far happier in the sense there is greater freedom. The time of monarchy in any part of the world, of tribalisms and tyrannical kings, was not the period of happiness or equality. The idea of progress, therefore, might be connected to the movement towards democracy, what is now called by social science people as democratization. The move towards greater liberty and greater freedom for a larger number of people. Where freedom used to be, during the monarchic times, the province of a few select elite people, there is more freedom for more people now. In fact, if you move from the Durant's time to our own, if you want to think of any idea of progress, we need to think of progress as freedom. And that, I think, is where the essay moves towards the end. So from democracy as progress, from freedom as progress, we come to the final and I think the most significant argument made by the essay. What is progress that humankind must guard it and quest for it? The answer they offer is, any civilization in history, any ancient civilization that you can think of, whether it's Roman or the Indus Valley, does not entirely disappear from Earth. Civilizations survive in certain ways. Some of their products survive, some of their ideas survive, some of their customs survive. Heritage, as it is often called, is a marker of any civilization. So civilizations leave some things behind for their next generation to enjoy, to benefit from, and to learn from. Things like the wheel have remained consistent, useful, and essential to civilization from around the world. The invention of fire, and as we know, to take the most relevant example, medicine and the invention of various drugs to fight serious illnesses are inheritances. The idea of progress must be connected, therefore, to what we save up, guard, and transmit to the next generation. It could be the idea of care, it could be the idea of tolerance and love and understanding, it could be any particular medical or technological invention. The Durants propose that the measure of progress is to be seen in what we leave behind for future generations to enjoy, to benefit from. Progress is civilization's responsibility towards the future generation. Now this is a very interesting and I think a very different version of what we define as progress. Progress is what we build for ourselves, yes, but progress is also what we transmit as values, norms, traditions, and usable customs for future generations. Heritage, as this is often called, is what we need to therefore safeguard, because that is what the future generations will benefit from. It is something we need to very carefully think through. At this point, yet again, I will go back to the first assumptions of the essay. Heritage implies a system of thinking. It's not just a set of material objects. And inheritance is not just what we gain to use. Inheritance is always a task. It's not a given. It's not just a ready-made device. Now, this means when we leave something behind for future generations, we need to ask, do we want to leave this or that? These are ethical questions. We have invented things that have caused destruction. We have also invented things that have given people pleasure. If you recall, the essay began with a question of the ethics of invention. Do we want to invent things that we can pass on to future generations that will cause suffering or which will cause happiness? Do we want to transmit things that will give them pleasure and safety, or which will give them suffering and sorrow? The essay once more returns to the question of the ethics of progress. Our devices, our ideas, our customs and norms of behavior are what will remain and will be transmitted to the next generation. These will constitute the heritage of the future generations. Let's take one crucial example. If we were to think of democracy and freedom as something we are trying to invent and improve, then shouldn't that constitute the biggest legacy we pass on? Shouldn't that be the heritage that we pass on to the future generations? Now, you do know that there are debates about global warming and the greenhouse effect, which is something that the future generations will, of course, inherit from us. That is, our developments in science and technology, our progress, if you will, has resulted in these rather calamitous effects. But please remember, these are not effects that we ourselves will experience. These are effects that the future generations will experience. Now, in addition to these rather problematic, rather destructive effects, do we also transmit something else? The idea of the essay is progress real hinges on our answer here. Are we also transmitting certain norms of behavior? Are we passing on as our legacy an inheritance of democracy, of freedom? Heritage, therefore, is something we need to very carefully think about, put together, compile, in other words, so that the future generations can benefit from it. The idea of progress is therefore the idea of responsibility, and that would be a very important argument. The phrase they use is connective tissue of human history. Connective tissue is history. Connective tissue is heritage, is the transmission of norms, behaviors, and values. I am suggesting here that the inheritance we need to guard and pass on is a responsibility that we all carry. The idea of progress is the idea of any culture's responsibility towards a future generation. Our connective tissue is therefore the responsibility with which we must function, which we must transmit and guard, so that the future generation can benefit too. Progress is the ability to think beyond our immediate generation and into the next. It's the ability and the responsibility, by which I mean both a response and a responsibility, responding in a certain way, to the future generation, so that they progress too.